Welcome to Radio Who, What, Why. I'm Jeff Schechtman. There are those events that are inflection points that change history. Last week, Hillary Clinton made the argument that the FBI's reopening of her email investigation changed the outcome of the election. Days later, in one of his longest and most detailed statistical analyses ever, Nate Silver provided the supporting argument that Comey's announced reopening of the email investigation did make a difference in the election. Today, we mark day 111 of the Trump presidency instead of the Clinton presidency, arguably because of emails discovered on Anthony Weiner's computer. How those emails got there and the larger story of the Weiner, Abedin, and FBI connection is an even larger story that we're going to talk about today. It's a story that shows how fragile and how subject to foul play our democratic process really is. Joining me to talk about it are Russ Baker and Matthew Harvey, two of the authors of yesterday's 8,000-word story on whowhatwhy.org that begins to shed light on the elaborate plot behind the exposure of Hillary Clinton's emails on Anthony Weiner's computer. Russ Baker, Matthew Harvey, thanks so much for being here.
Great, pleasure.
Russ, I want to start with you. This notion that these emails just showed up on Anthony Weiner's computer was not just a twist of fate, arguably, but really a much more elaborate set of circumstances that may have taken place that really led the FBI to that computer in the first place.
That's right, Jeff. In the course of a month of looking at that, we began to see indications that, shall we say, the public was helped along to this sort of conclusion. And we began to see a whole series of events that suggested that there was some kind of collusion on the part of people who wanted Donald Trump to win in terms of creating let's say the interest in those emails, the interest in Anthony Weiner, and quite possibly creating the incident that brought Anthony Weiner together with this young woman that made the whole thing possible.
One of the other aspects of this, Matt, is the degree to which they were constant statements in the weeks leading up to the discovery of these emails on Weiner's computer, statements from the Trump campaign about an October surprise that would be coming.
I think that was part of an information campaign developed from foreknowledge of this event, and how they knew about it is open to speculation. There may have been leaks. Certainly, Giuliani is very close to the NYPD, of course, and people in the FBI. So. That may have been one conduit. He was one of the Trump surrogates most in front of trying to push this narrative, and Eric Prince as well, who has sources certainly in law enforcement. Now, whether these sources were real or not, and whether they were telling the truth or not, it seems no, but they could. Of course, there was the truth that there was something coming down the pike, but all the rest was speculation.
One of the things, Russ, that's particularly interesting is going back even further than this incident, that Trump had frequently talked about Anthony Weiner and exposing Weiner as a way to get at Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, when we read those tweets over the course of several years, and in the article on Who, What, Why, I believe we've embedded some of those tweets, and there are links so that people can read the rest of them. Trump definitely appears to be signaling. I mean, it's even kind of, I think at the time, starting a couple of years ago, when Trump started saying, Hillary Clinton's emails and Huma Abedin, her aide, and her husband, Anthony Weiner, they know something. How did he know that they knew something? I mean, that's deeply intriguing.
I want to take this back a little bit to the idea that the discovery of these emails on Anthony Weiner's computer were really because of a second investigation that was going on into Weiner's sexting, in this case with an underage girl. Russ, talk a little bit about that. Give a little backstory on that.
So this story emerged last year during the campaign that Anthony Weiner had been exchanging explicit text messages with an underage girl reportedly located in a small town in North Carolina. And this story just got a lot of attention right away because people are interested in Anthony Weiner to begin with. But when it became clear that the second part of the story, Jeff, is that so there's an alleged crime here being committed, and then the authorities supposedly go to seize, his phone, and then at some point his computer, and then we are told that on the computer they discover Hillary Clinton's email. So now you've got the perfect storm. You've got this guy that everybody loathes, and suddenly somehow he's connected to Hillary Clinton and to this email thing that was so damaging to her. It's a double whammy or a triple whammy, and that's where everything just goes to a whole different level. I mean, I'm not sure that most people, including most people in the media, ever really understood what any of this was about. But again, you boil it down, these buzzwords: Hillary Clinton, emails, Anthony Weiner, depraved sexual behavior. I mean, these just start pushing all kinds of buttons in people's brains. And at that point, when you're talking about a close election, you don't need a lot more to push a few people over the line and make a difference.
And in fact, as is pointed out in the article, Hillary Clinton and Anthony Weiner had very little contact or connection with each other, even in spite of Huma Abedin.
That's right. And but you see, that's where we got interested in whether this whole thing was a setup, and the fact that Trump seemed to be trying to draw people's attention to it. In a nutshell, what our article is about is this sort of copious evidence that Trump realized, or his organization and him realized, that one way to harm Hillary Clinton was to sort of try to tie her, like to a kind of a really noxious flypaper. And they must have looked around. I mean, again, this is speculation, but I think the details in this very long article strongly suggest this, that they looked around and said, what is there about Hillary that you could really go after her on? Well, one thing obviously is Bill Clinton, and they did that at that debate where they brought all these women that had allegations against Bill Clinton for misbehavior. They didn't have a lot else to go on with her, and the thing about the emails themselves was a little bit dry, frankly. They really were not striking oil particularly. I mean, how had that endangered the United States and so forth. And so it was a struggle. It was a little too sort of bureaucratic, the whole thing. But once you then bring in some reviled figure, that just takes it to a whole level. And as you point out, these early tweets from Donald Trump seem to set the stage for that they were thinking about this. And as Matt points out, the later behavior by Rudy Giuliani, who's plugged into all these key law enforcement centers in New York that would have dealt with this case, and his sort of, hinting gleefully that something is coming. I mean, these are very, very strong signals that this is just what happened.
Matt, talk a little bit about the way this arguably got started as you lay it out in this article, the way in which Weiner may have actually been entrapped with respect to this 15-year-old girl in North Carolina.
Well, he had been possibly entrapped before, as far back as 2011. And so there were people that knew that it could be done already. And one of the people was Sydney Leathers, and she was she was the person that really brought his 2013 campaign to a halt. and she was very outspoken about her ability to entrap politicians. So she was already a character, speaking extensively about her sexting relationship with Anthony Weiner to anyone who would listen. And then you enter this character, Chuck C. Johnson, who's kind of an independent alt-right money source that is just. But he became very close to the Trump campaign, and he's very good at finding weaknesses and in chinks in armor of politicians. So him and Leathers got together, and they figured out a way to find more women that would be potential targets, potential victims of, quote unquote, victims of Weiner. And that's kind of what got the ball rolling. And then they shopped the story around to different journalists, and we see it, 1, 2, 3 coming in the months be right before the election, 2 in October, then the big one in September with the young girl. And this is speculation that the other 2 had to do with Johnson, but certainly the one on the September 21st, which was the big one, which was the underage girl, was money paid to Leathers to find a girl that could get Weiner in a lot of trouble.
What was it, Russ, that precipitated the FBI's investigation into Weiner and this alleged underage girl?
Well, this is all very murky, and I think it's important to point out that almost none of what was claimed has come about. So, for example, even the notion that Anthony Weiner committed a crime, that he was being investigated, that he faced possible prosecution, some of the conservative and right-wing media basically said he faces long jail time, but as far as we can tell, he does not face anything. And this is very interesting. So when we talk about the FBI investigation and so on, we really don't know. And they haven't said. And if you watch Comey, when he was asked about any of these things, I mean, I guess they never say very much publicly, but there may not be a lot to say. And so you've got an allegation of this sexting. It's across state lines. Would be a federal issue. But again, I mean, the fact that Weiner has not been, as far as we know, that there is no current prosecution going on. So we don't know that there's a lot to it. We do know that the FBI got hold of his computer, and we know that on that computer they found some Hillary Clinton emails, although even that, in recent days, we find that that may have been misstated. Originally, there was a sense that there were vast numbers, hundreds or thousands of Hillary Clinton emails, supposedly many of them containing classified material. But just the last few days, we hear that Comey misspoke and that there may have been very, very few emails on there. And in fact, this may have been about nothing more than the fact that Hillary Clinton liked to read memos on paper, not on computer, and she would have her assistants print them out. And so it made sense, since Huma Abedin was a close aide of Hillary Clinton, constantly with her, that she'd be the one to print these out. And what we now understand is that her husband may have helped her sometimes, that she had so much printing to do that she would just forward certain ones to him and then he'd print them out. And as we now hear, it may be that very, very few of them were classified, or even if they were, that they were duplicates of other ones that already were in issue. And so this is where the whole thing becomes so murky and so remarkable, Jeff, that it could change the course of history. This thing could change the course of history when we don't even know what really went down here.
One of the things that you talk about is that one of the reasons that arguably Comey had to go public with this is that there were potential forces inside the FBI that would have exposed this if he hadn't.
Yep, that's right. And in fact, we were struck by the fact that supposedly, and again, this is all supposedly Comey did not learn of these emails on Hillary Clinton's computer until 2 days before he made his statement in late October. But the FBI itself, or at least some of the people in the New York office, knew about them weeks earlier. And this is fascinating, too, because, if they found those emails on the computer in early October, why did it take them so long to tell Comey? The net effect of this, of course, is that it wasn't until extremely close to the election, about 10 days before the election, that this whole thing broke. Now, had they notified Comey in the beginning of October, and had he then made the same decision that he needed to go public with this, there would have been weeks for a course correction, and you very likely would have seen another outcome. Now, how did that all play? This raises the question of whether the New York FBI office deliberately delayed telling Comey, because the excuses they made sound rather feeble. They said that they were busy with other things. It didn't seem that important. That their computers that were processing these kept crashing. I mean, that seems sort of ridiculous. If you think about, the FBI's vaunted capabilities for handling huge amounts of data. I mean, the fact that one didn't even go scrutinized by the media is another indication of just how poor our media often is. But this does suggest, and again, there's quite a bit about the New York FBI office. We are told that it was very Trump-friendly, certainly very Giuliani-friendly, and Giuliani himself very, very Trump-friendly.
You mentioned Eric Prince a while ago of Blackwater fame and the brother of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. Where does he fit into this equation?
Eric Prince, I'll just mention him, and then maybe Matt can provide some more detail. Eric Prince is very important in this story because he runs these various sorts of businesses that benefit tremendously from the kind of outsourcing that particularly Republican presidents have done in the areas of foreign policy and military. And as you point out, I mean, that his sister then is named by Donald Trump to be the Secretary of Education. Very, very powerful family, very wealthy family. And he's plugged in, as Matt said, into law enforcement, very connected, or at least he claims to be extremely well connected into New York FBI, New York Police Department, and to have inside information on all this. Perhaps Matt can speak a little bit more to that.
Sure. Well, among the alt-right information outlets, I think he was the main person, the main Trump surrogate, pushing that there was so much more to this story. And because of his alleged connections, he was taken quite seriously. So it led to all sorts of he speculated. He was speculating. I mean, but his speculation led to even more further speculation about Clinton's sex crimes, and he spoke of great evils to be discovered on these emails. I mean, we're talking about like 2 or 3 days before the election, and we have an already very angered Trump base that Hillary's getting away with something wrong, and then you add to this all this sex stuff, and that leads to speculation about Pizzagate, and it's a real like noxious conspiratorial stew that of course had no basis as has come out. But he was out there plugging away on this, and his word was taken quite seriously among Trump voters.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, this is a crucial point Matt just raised. People who did not vote for Trump probably have no idea, and when they hear these kind of things, they dismiss them as ludicrous. And so they miss the whole point. They may dismiss them as ludicrous, but if you actually talk to a lot of people who voted for Trump, if you read the kinds of things that they post online, they are almost singularly focused on the idea that the Clintons are morally depraved, bad people. And this is a tremendous motivator for people to get out and vote, to convince other people, and so forth. And this kind of, if you want to call it a psychological operation, is calculated. In other words, if you push certain buttons with people, you can get them to do whatever you need them to do. And I think the failure of news outlets in the United States to really explore the role of disinformation, calculated disinformation, manipulation in our political system, not just in this election, but in all elections. I think this is a real travesty, and unless we get our hands around this kind of a problem and its recurrent role in the American political system, I think it's going to continue to get worse.
All we have to do is look back to the swift voting of John Kerry in his election to see the way this stuff started to evolve, Russ.
That's right, and I personally, over the years, have covered many of these things in my book, Family of Secrets. I go into how the Bush family mastered creating scandals around their opponents, their enemies, defaming people, smearing people, falsifying things. So, yes, absolutely. Swift Votes was one on whowhatwhy.org. If you type in the names Gary Hart, John Edwards, and so forth, you will see that in every one of those cases where a liberal or a progressive candidate was taken down over a sexual situation, there are indications that these things were helped along. And I think that, again, this is a failing of the media to acknowledge the critical role of covert operations, the kinds of tricks and tools of the trade used by intelligence organizations in the course of American political campaigns, that this is actually the norm. And so if you only cover the surface movements and statements and things like that, and you talk to the pollsters and you sort of characterize how the candidates are perceived without paying any attention at all to this sort of sub rosa manipulation, you're not doing your job. And this, Jeff, I think gets to a deeper point, which is the media's absolute terror of being labeled as so-called conspiracy theorists. Of course, this article and the sorts of things that the FBI investigates are all about conspiracies, because conspiracies are part of the fiber of life. And we've got to acknowledge that and take that seriously, while also not embracing or giving any sort of credibility to those who try to postulate conspiracies everywhere and where there are none. But journalists and others need to be empowered to be thoughtful and to be intelligent and to dig deep to find out why things are happening.
It's interesting. We talked about the swift voting with respect to Kerry. There was also a kind of New York-based predicate for some of this in terms of what happened with Eliot Spitzer and the arguments and the confusion that to this day surround that.
That's right. And in fact, of course, if you see the documentary about that on Client 9, I think it makes pretty clear that people knew that Eliot Spitzer had these inclinations and were able to, shall we say, help this thing along. That's precisely my point, that there is a history to this sort of thing. And our failure to go look back, to dig deep, we are destined to keep repeating this over and over again.
Before we try to draw all this together in this story, is how many people were involved? You mentioned early on, Russ, that there's a fascinating cast of characters involved in this. We've mentioned a few people like Eric Prince, Giuliani, and several others, but there are many others that were really part of getting this story out there.
There's Alana Goodman, who is the person who wrote the story for the Daily Mail. She was a new hire for the Daily Mail. She had she had been there a month when she wrote this story. But she's quite young, but for several years before that, she had been at the Washington Free Beacon writing almost exclusively about the evils of the Clintons. In fact, her first story of note, maybe ever, for that outlet, which is, again, many people haven't heard of that, but it's very popular among the folks that would vote for Trump. Her first story ever was going down to Arkansas and finding these tapes that had Clinton kind of talking, I guess, callously about this rapist that she got off in when she was younger in Arkansas as a public defender. It wasn't really a bombshell by any means, but for the right wing that already rank and file, especially that already think she's a monster, it added fuel to that fire. And then she just went from that story to Clinton scandal to Clinton scandal to Clinton scandal. And then she was friends with kind of this, I guess, agent provocateur called Cassandra Fairbanks, who writes for Sputnik, which of course is the Kremlin-backed outlet. It's kind of the second string of the Russian English language stations. It's mostly radio and online content, but it's basically like RT, but not as quite as professional. But she was also very close to the FBI informant, and she was an interesting character because she had for maybe years gone around saying she was a progressive and kind of working Black Lives Matters marches and those type of activism pushes. And she was kind of suspected because of her. She posed a lot and she created a lot of provocations. And sure enough, it came out that she was close to this FBI informant. So add to that stew Chuck C. Johnson, who's probably the most interesting of these characters because of the money he has, the connections he has. I mean, he's not just an independent. He's also friends with Steve Bannon. He's friends with Peter Thiel, or at least acquaintances with Peter Thiel, as he admits, and very close to Eric Prince. They, as he says, they talk every week. So, and he was the guy that set the whole thing up with Sidney Leathers. So, I mean, it's a very close circuit. And as Russ found out in his interview with Chuck Johnson, he got 100 people or more into the Trump government. Trump transition changed everything for these guys, for somebody like him.
And finally, Russ, talk a little bit briefly about how you think that the firing of Comey may impact how this story continues to unfold and be revealed.
Well, first of all, there's shock, to say the least, over the Comey firing, although shock seems to be the norm now, sort of the daily diet. We have a new piece up today on Who, What, Why about the Comey firing. I mean, I think that, they're trying to portray it as Trump just did it on his own and he just had enough, and it was sort of a surprise to everyone, but I highly doubt that. I mean, I think the problem is that Comey now has been under pressure for a variety of reasons, that he has to do something. He's got to redeem the FBI's reputation by going after these things, by going after all of these different stories that are in play, most important of all, the Trump-Russia story. And so now that he's out, and since Trump does seek yes men, we can assume that he will replace him with somebody who is told in no uncertain terms not to pursue any of this. And of course, if they don't pursue any of this, what will happen next? You've got the Republicans in control in Congress. Will they push for aggressive investigations? Frankly, I doubt it. And then the question is, who's going to be able to push for it? A minority party? People going into the streets? We really don't know what's going to happen next.
Russ Baker, Matthew Harvey. The story appears in whowhatwhy.org. Thank you both for shedding some light on this today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Hi, this is Russ Baker. If you like that podcast, please feel free to share it and help others find it by rating it and reviewing it on iTunes. Also, if you'd like to see us continue to do this kind of hard-hitting investigative journalism, we need your help. Please support our work. Go to whowhatwhy.org/donate.